I guess every marriage has its ups and downs, right? You go through phases, some better than others, but you never really expect your life to blow up the way mine did. I'd been married to Madeline for 10 years. Well, I was married, I should say, and for most of that time, we were solid, you know? I really thought she was my person, and I believed I was hers. But looking back, I couldn't have seen what was coming, even if it hit me square in the face, which eventually it did. It all started about a year ago. Madeline changed, and I can't think of any other way to describe it. One moment, she was the woman I married, funny, warm, easy to talk to. And the next, she became a stranger in our home. It felt like she was fighting some invisible battle inside her. Something was eating at her, making her anxious and distant. She'd cry for no reason, out of the blue. There wasn't a fight or anything, nothing we were arguing about. She'd just break down in tears, and there I'd be, standing like an idiot, trying to comfort her. But no matter what I did, it didn't seem to make a difference. I assumed it was just stress. You know how life piles on with work and everything else. But I was way off. It wasn't just stress. There was something deeper going on. Eventually, I brought up therapy, thinking that maybe talking to someone would help her sort through whatever was tearing her apart. I mean, at that point, I was desperate. Our marriage was hanging by a thread. I couldn't even touch her without her recoiling, like I was the problem. So we found a therapist, Victoria. A friend recommended her, said she had some unconventional methods, but she got results. At that point, I was willing to try anything. Victoria suggested that Madeline needed an outlet for her emotions, some way to express what was going on inside without keeping it all bottled up. She said art therapy, like painting, could help. I wasn't sure what to think of that. Madeline had never been into anything artistic, but if it had the potential to bring her back to me, I was all in. Madeline, though, wasn't convinced right away. She gave me this look like, really? Painting? But after a few sessions with Victoria, she agreed to give it a shot. What did we have to lose, right? So she signed up for some adult art classes. I remember her first day like it was yesterday. She came home buzzing with excitement, something I hadn't seen in months. She had these sketches, nothing amazing, but she acted like they were masterpieces. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled. It was like a glimmer of the woman I'd married was back. I thought we were finally turning a corner. Her mood lifted. She had more energy, started caring about her appearance again, new clothes, makeup, fixing her hair like she hadn't in ages. At first, I was relieved. I thought, finally, we're getting back on track. She seemed happy, and that's all I cared about. I didn't give much thought to what was behind it, as long as it made her feel better. But, of course, nothing's ever that simple. It never is, right? At first, I didn't think twice about her staying late at these art classes. I figured she was just really into it, maybe working on her projects, chatting with the instructor, something like that. She had this new passion, and I didn't want to be the guy who questioned it. I was just glad she wasn't breaking down into tears every night. But then I started noticing little things. She got secretive. She stopped showing me her work. If I asked what she was painting, she'd brush me off like it wasn't worth discussing. In her outfits, she wasn't just dressing casually for a messy art class anymore. She started wearing clothes that seemed, well, a bit much for painting. Tight jeans, low-cut tops, stuff I hadn't seen her wear in years. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to convince myself that maybe she was just feeling better, more confident. That's what I told myself, anyway. But when I tried to bring it up, she got defensive, snapping at me like I was prying. It wasn't long before I began to wonder if this whole painting thing was about more than just finding a new hobby. I even mentioned it to Victoria during one of our sessions. I told her about Madeline's changes, how distant she still seemed, even though she was happier in some ways. Victoria assured me it was normal, that Madeline was going through some kind of growth. She said I needed to be patient, that these transformations take time. She's healing, Victoria told me. This is a good thing. But was it? There was this feeling deep in my gut that wouldn't go away. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it felt like Madeline was slipping away, and I had no idea how to stop it. I tried being the supportive husband. Really, I did. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that maybe Madeline needed some space to figure herself out. But every time she walked out the door, dressed to the nines for some art class, something inside me twisted. There was more to this than just painting, and I could feel it. but I was still clueless about what was really going on. I had no idea just how bad things were going to get. Weeks passed, and I convinced myself we were settling into a new kind of normal. But honestly, if I'd known then what I know now, I would have seen the signs much sooner. It wasn't like she changed overnight, but looking back, it's painfully obvious where things started to go wrong. At first, I tried to ignore it. You know that feeling when you sense something's off, but you don't want to face it? That's where I was. I didn't want to believe Madeline was capable of anything shady. But damn, she made it hard to shake that doubt. It all started with the painting classes. I was relieved she wasn't crying every night or hiding in some dark corner of the house. But that relief didn't last long. She was going out and doing something she seemed to genuinely love. I thought, hey, if painting is what pulled her out of that dark place, then I should be thankful, right? So, when she started staying late at the studio, I didn't think too much of it. I mean, it's art, right? People get lost in their passion. She seemed happier, and I wasn't about to be the jerk who questioned that. But then those late nights started happening more and more. She'd come home not worn out from a long session of painting, but oddly energized, like she'd just come back from something far more thrilling than mixing colors on a canvas. And then she stopped sharing her art with me, which should have been a huge red flag. When she first started, she couldn't wait to show me her sketches, asking for my thoughts, even though I knew next to nothing about art. But suddenly that just stopped. When I'd ask her about it, she'd give me some vague answer like it's not ready yet, or you wouldn't understand. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I wasn't an art critic, but I was her husband, and it felt like she was deliberately shutting me out of her life. And then there were the outfits. That's when everything started to really click for me. She wasn't just tossing on an old t-shirt and leggings to get paint on. No, now she was slipping into tight dresses, low-cut tops, and heels I hadn't seen her wear in years. I mean, who dresses like that for an art class? That was the moment I knew something was up. I guess in every marriage, there are highs and lows, right? You go through different phases, some better, some worse, but you never really expect your life to explode the way mine did. I'd been married to Madeline for 10 years. Well, was married, I should say. And for most of that time, we were solid. She was my person, and I truly believed I was hers. Looking back, I couldn't have seen what was coming, even if it was staring me right in the face. It started about a year ago. Madeline changed. There's no better way to put it. 1 minute, she was the same funny, warm, and easy-to-talk-to woman I married. The next minute, it was like a stranger had moved into our house. It was as if she was fighting some inner battle. Something was clearly gnawing at her, making her anxious and distant. She'd cry all the time, sometimes out of nowhere, and it wasn't like we were fighting about anything serious. She'd just break down, and there I'd be, clueless, trying to console her. But no matter what I did, it didn't seem to help. I thought maybe it was stress. You know how life gets work, deadlines, everything piling up? But I was wrong. It wasn't just stress. Something much deeper was going on. Eventually, I suggested therapy. I figured talking to someone might help her deal with whatever was eating her up inside. I mean, at that point, I was desperate. Our relationship was on its last legs. I couldn't even touch her without her flinching like I was the enemy. So, we found a psychologist, Victoria. She came highly recommended by a friend of mine who swore by her unconventional methods. Apparently, she got results, and at that point, I was ready to try anything. Victoria suggested Madeline needed an outlet for her emotions, something to help her express what was going on inside without bottling it all up. She recommended painting, claiming it could be therapeutic. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. Madeline had never shown the slightest interest in anything artistic, but if it could help bring her back to me, I was on board. Madeline wasn't convinced at first. She gave me that look, like, really? Painting? But after a couple of therapy sessions, she agreed to give it a try. What do we have to lose? So, she signed up for these adult art classes. I remember her first day like it happened yesterday. She came home absolutely buzzing with energy, something I hadn't seen in months. She had some sketches with her. Nothing spectacular, but the way she showed them off, you'd think they were masterpieces. And for the first time in forever, she smiled. It was like I was getting her back. I thought we'd finally turned a corner. Her mood lifted. She had more energy. She started taking care of herself again. New clothes, makeup, fixing her hair like she hadn't in years. At first, I was relieved. I thought, finally, we're getting back to normal. I didn't care how we got there, as long as she was happy. But, of course, things didn't stay that simple. They never do, right? In the beginning, I didn't question her late nights at the art studio. I just figured she was really into it, maybe staying late to work on her projects or talk with the instructor. She had this new passion, and I didn't want to be the guy who spoiled it by questioning everything. I mean, I was just relieved she wasn't crying every night. But soon I started noticing other things. She became secretive. She stopped sharing her work with me altogether. When I asked her what she was working on, she'd brush me off like it wasn't worth talking about. And those clothes? She wasn't just throwing on something casual to go mess around with paint. She was wearing tight jeans and low-cut tops, things I hadn't seen her wear in years. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to tell myself she was just feeling more confident, maybe happier with herself. That's what I wanted to believe anyway. But when I brought it up, she got defensive. She'd snap at me or quickly change the subject, like I was prying too much. That's when I started to wonder if this painting hobby was about more than just art. Something wasn't adding up. I even talked to Victoria about it during one of our sessions. I told her about how Madeline had changed, how, even though she seemed happier in some ways, she was still distant. Victoria reassured me, said this was all normal. Madeline was going through a period of growth. She said, I just needed to be patient. Victoria kept telling me to be patient, that these kinds of changes take time. She's healing, she'd say, trying to reassure me that this was a good thing. But was it, though? That gnawing feeling in my gut kept telling me otherwise, something I just couldn't ignore. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it felt like Madeline was slipping away, and I had no clue how to stop it. I did everything I could to be the supportive husband. I really tried. I kept telling myself, it's just a phase. Maybe she needs space to figure things out. But every time I watched her walk out that door, all dressed up for an art class, something twisted inside me. This wasn't just about painting, I knew that. I could feel it, but I was completely in the dark about what was really going on. I had no idea just how bad things would get. As the weeks went by, I told myself we were adjusting to some new version of normal. But honestly, if I had known back then what I know now, I would have noticed the signs much sooner. It wasn't like she just flipped a switch overnight. But looking back, it's clear when things started to shift in a way that made my stomach churn. At first, I tried to brush it off. You know how you can sense something's not right, but you don't want to face it? That's where I was. I didn't want to believe Madeline was capable of anything shady. But, damn, she sure made it hard to ignore that growing doubt. It all started with those painting classes. In the beginning, I was just relieved she wasn't crying herself to sleep or shutting herself off in some dark room of the house. She was actually getting out, doing something she claimed to love. I figured, hey, if painting is what pulled her out of that dark place, I should be thankful. So, when she started staying late at the studio, I didn't think much of it. It's art, I told myself. People lose track of time when they're passionate about something. She seemed happier, and I didn't want to be the jerk questioning why. But then, the late nights became more frequent. She'd come home, not exhausted from a day of painting, but almost buzzing with energy, like she'd been doing something way more thrilling than mixing colors on a canvas. And that's when she stopped showing me her work, which, looking back, was the first red flag I missed. In the beginning, she was eager to show me her sketches, asking for my thoughts, even though I didn't know the first thing about art. Then, out of nowhere, that stopped. When I'd ask about her latest piece, she'd give me vague excuses like it's not ready yet or you wouldn't get it. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I wasn't an art critic, but I was her husband, and it felt like she was shutting me out of her life, piece by piece. And then there were the clothes. That was when it all started to click for me. She wasn't just throwing on an old t-shirt and leggings to get paint on. No, now she was dressing up, tight dresses, low-cut tops, and heels I hadn't seen in years. I'm talking date night outfits, stuff you wouldn't expect to see at a messy art class. I tried to play it cool, casually asked her about it. She just smiled and said, "It makes me feel good about myself." And okay, sure, I get it, everyone wants to feel good about themselves. But it still didn't sit right with me. I'd watch her get ready, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine, but I couldn't shake it. Every time she left the house looking like that, the knot in my stomach just got tighter. And it wasn't jealousy. We'd been married for years, and I had always trusted her. But now, that trust felt fragile. For the first time, I found myself wondering if she wasn't just dressing up for herself. When I'd ask her about her day or what she worked on in class, she'd dodge the question. "Oh, it was just a typical day," or "nothing special," she'd say, and then quickly change the subject to something she couldn't care less about, like my work. I'd sit there feeling like an idiot, wondering why I suddenly felt like I was living with a stranger. It wasn't just a lack of details. It was her tone, the way she'd deflect any real conversation. There was this invisible wall between us now, one that hadn't been there before. And to make matters worse, our sex life had gone from rare to non-existent. I'd try to make a move, but she always had some excuse. Too tired, not in the mood, too focused on her art. The Madeline I knew, the one who used to pull me close in bed, was gone. In her place was this distant, cold version of herself. And it left me feeling completely alone, even when she was right there next to me. I even brought it up during one of our therapy sessions with Victoria. I tried to be casual about it, saying something like, "I've noticed Madeline's been spending a lot more time at these classes, and she seems different." Victoria, of course, was quick to brush it off. "This is a good thing, James," she said. "People evolve when they discover something that speaks to their soul. Madeline is healing, and sometimes the process just looks a little unfamiliar." She gave me that therapist smile, the one that makes it seem like she has all the answers. But, man, it didn't do a damn thing to calm me down. I wanted to believe her. I really did. Victoria was supposed to be the expert here, and maybe I was just being paranoid. But the more I tried to push those doubts aside, the bigger they grew. It was like this constant knot in my gut telling me something was off. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe Madeline wasn't just healing. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something from me. One night, I distinctly remember she arrived home late once again. I was slouched on the couch, aimlessly flipping through channels, trying to feign indifference as I waited for her return. When she finally walked through the door, I glanced up, and there it was again, her figure draped in a dress that clung to her body as if she were off to a cocktail party, not an art class. She flashed me a smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. They seemed distant. That emptiness had been lingering for a while now. "Late night?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. She simply nodded, kicking off her heels as if it were the most mundane thing in the world. "Yeah, I lost track of time," she replied, brushing it off like it was no big deal. Then, she settled down beside me on the couch, deliberately not touching me, just close enough for me to feel her presence without any warmth. "How was your day?" I inquired. "My day?" I let out a bitter laugh, perhaps a bit too harsh. "Pretty normal. How's your class? Seems like you're spending a lot of time there." She met my gaze for a brief moment, her eyes flickering with a mixture of emotions I couldn't decipher. Was it guilt? Annoyance? I couldn't tell. "It's just painting, James. You don't have to make a big deal out of it," she snapped. Inside, I was screaming, desperate to tell her it was a big deal, that I could feel her slipping away from me. Instead, I merely nodded like the fool I was becoming. "Yeah, sure. Just painting." Shortly after, she retreated to bed, leaving me on the couch, staring at the TV screen but not truly seeing anything. Doubts and suspicions swirled in my mind, growing louder with each passing moment. I wanted to trust her just like I always had, but deep down, I felt something was off. I needed to uncover the truth. At work the next day, while trying to concentrate on the endless stream of emails, my phone rang. It was Matthew, a close friend from way back, someone I hadn't seen much of in the past year due to all the chaos with Madeline. There was a strange tone in his voice, an edge that made the hair on my neck stand on end. "James, can we meet tonight? It's important." I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "What's going on? Can't this wait?" "No, it can't," he replied, his voice tense. "We need to talk. I'll explain everything in person." Those words were the kind that play tricks with your mind, the kind that left you wondering what could possibly be so serious. We arranged to meet at a bar near my office. My mind raced. Was something wrong with Matthew? Or was it about something else entirely? Whatever it was, I wasn't prepared for what he revealed. That evening, we met, grabbed a couple of beers, and settled into a corner booth. The look on his face told me whatever he had to say wouldn't be good. He kept shifting in his seat, taking long sips of his drink, as if summoning the courage to spit it out. After what felt like an eternity of awkward small talk, he finally blurted out, "I went to an art exhibition last night." I stared at him, puzzled about why that mattered. "Okay," I said, encouraging him to continue. "And one of the paintings," he said quietly, "was of a naked woman. And James," he paused, locking eyes with me. "It was Madeline." Initially, I laughed, dismissing his words. "No way. You've got to be kidding." I thought he was playing one of his ridiculous jokes, as Matthew often did. "Come on, man. Madeline? A naked painting? You've lost your mind." But Matthew's expression didn't shift. He was serious, no hint of a smile. "I'm not joking, James," he said in a hushed tone. "It was her." The resemblance was striking. I know how crazy this sounds, but I swear to you, I saw it with my own eyes. The artist's name was Simon. Does that ring a bell? The moment I heard that name, my blood ran cold. That was the guy Madeline had mentioned from her art class, the same one she always stayed late with. I couldn't shake the memory of her casually dropping his name. And now Matthew was saying the same guy had painted her naked. My head spun as I stared at Matthew. "You're serious?" I asked, my laughter evaporating. "I wouldn't lie to you about something like this," he insisted. I leaned back, struggling to digest his words. My heart raced, my mind whirled. I wanted to believe Matthew was mistaken, that there had to be some explanation. But deep down, a part of me, the part that had quietly doubted Madeline for months, knew that something was amiss, and it wasn't good. I slammed my drink down, feeling my anger rise. "You're full of shit, Matthew," I spat, desperately trying to cling to a reality where none of this was happening. "There's no way that was Madeline. You must have gotten it wrong." "I didn't get it wrong, James," Matthew shot back firmly. "I know her. I've known her just as long as you have. I'm telling you it was her. She has that little birthmark right on her left shoulder." I froze. He couldn't possibly know about that birthmark unless he was telling the truth. No way. No fucking way. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. "Thanks for the drink," I muttered before storming out of the bar, my head spinning. I didn't wait for him to respond. I needed fresh air, space to process the bombshell he had just dropped. When I arrived home that night, Madeline was already asleep, looking so peaceful, utterly unaware of the tempest swirling in my mind. I gazed at her, questioning how much of her I truly knew anymore. Sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that painting, the one I hadn't even laid eyes on yet, haunting me relentlessly. The following morning, I woke up with a fierce determination to uncover the truth. I needed to see it for myself, even if it shattered me in the process. I called in sick to work, quickly got dressed, and drove straight to the gallery Matthew had mentioned. My heart pounded relentlessly in my chest during the entire drive, and my knuckles turned white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. When I arrived at the gallery, I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. My stomach churned, and my palms felt clammy. But I had to know. I wandered through the gallery, glancing at paintings that didn't spark any interest in me until I finally found it. The painting. It felt like a punch to the gut. There she was, Madeline, exposed in all her naked glory. Every detail was unmistakable. Her face, her body, everything. The way her hair cascaded over her shoulder, the curve of her back, and that birthmark, small but unmistakable, just beneath her collarbone. I felt nauseous, my stomach twisting painfully as I fought the urge to vomit right there on the gallery floor. The painting was beautiful in its own haunting way, yet all I could focus on was the betrayal it represented. How could she do this? How could she allow someone to capture her like that? I stood there, staring at the canvas for what felt like hours, my mind racing with unanswered questions. The intimacy of it was overwhelming. This wasn't merely art, it was personal. Someone had seen her in ways I hadn't in months, perhaps even longer. My fists clenched tightly, a deep rage rising within me. I wanted to tear that painting off the wall and smash it into pieces, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I just stood there, fixated on the image of the woman I thought I knew, questioning how we had ended up in this nightmare situation. I couldn't remain still after witnessing that painting. It was seared into my mind, haunting me like a nightmare I couldn't escape. I didn't know how much longer I could keep from exploding. Every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was my wife, naked and exposed for the world to see. I had to take action. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to go. Madeline had mentioned Simon's studio a couple of times when she started her classes. It was located in an old building downtown, one of those places that looked like it was falling apart on the outside, but was supposedly creative and edgy on the inside. I had never been there, but I knew the address well. I couldn't recall the drive over. My head was spinning, my heart racing, and my grip on the steering wheel was so tight my knuckles were practically glowing. By the time I reached the studio, my anger was barely contained. I was trembling, desperately trying to hold it together, but I knew that the moment I laid eyes on Simon's smug face, everything would come pouring out. I parked the car, hopped out, and marched toward the door like a man on a mission. This wasn't some petty misunderstanding. This was personal. He had no right to see her like that. I pounded on the door, and after what felt like an eternity, it finally creaked open. There stood Simon, the artist, the man who had destroyed my marriage. He looked as though he didn't have a care in the world. I didn't give him a chance to speak. I pushed my way inside, fury boiling within me. "How dare you pay my wife like that?" I shouted, my voice trembling with anger. "You had no right." I could feel the heat rising in my face, my fists clenched tightly at my sides. Simon, however, remained annoyingly calm, as if he had been expecting me. "It's not what you think, James. Please, let me explain," he said, raising his hands in a patronizing gesture, like I was some wild animal he needed to soothe. I didn't care what he had to say. I was ready to rip him apart. "Explain? What the hell is there to explain? You painted her naked. You've been screwing around with her." My voice shook with fury, my words tumbling out in a chaotic mix of rage and pain. Simon attempted to respond, his voice infuriatingly calm. "James, you don't understand. It's not." But before he could finish, I heard a door creaking open. I spun around, and there she was, Madeline, standing in the doorway at the back of the studio, wearing nothing but a loose robe that barely covered her, hanging off her shoulders like a cruel joke. My heart dropped, and time seemed to freeze. The sight of her half-naked in Simon's studio felt like the last piece of the puzzle sliding into place, and suddenly everything made sense. All those late nights, the suspicious behavior, the way she had distanced herself from me. This was what she had been doing. This was the truth. "Is this what you've been doing all this time?" I demanded, my voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. I looked at her, pleading with hope against hope that this wasn't real, that there was some explanation that didn't involve her shattering everything we'd built together. But the expression on her face told me everything I needed to know. She didn't even attempt to deny it. She stood there, frozen, guilt etched across her features, her mouth agape, as if she wanted to say something, but no words emerged. She didn't need to say anything. I could see it. I could feel it. My vision blurred with rage. The world around me faded into the background as anger consumed me. Without thinking, I turned back to Simon and swung my fist, connecting with his face. The impact sent him reeling backward, blood trickling from his nose as he clutched it, eyes wide with shock. He didn't fight back. He didn't utter a word. He simply stood there, as if he knew he deserved it. In that moment, I didn't care about him, about anything. I stormed out of the studio, my heart racing in my chest. My fists were still clenched so tightly they ached. I couldn't process what had just transpired. The betrayal, the lies, the image of Madeline standing there as if it were no big deal. I jumped in my car and drove off, aimlessly navigating the streets. I had no idea where I was headed or what I planned to do. All I knew was that I needed to escape from them, from her, and from the wreckage that my life had become. My mind raced with flashes of the past year, moments I had missed, signs I had ignored. How could I have been so blind? Then the realization hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just about the painting. It wasn't just some art piece. It was evidence of her infidelity. She had been intimately involved with him, and I had failed to recognize it. That night, I had turned a blind eye, and now I was paying the price. Instead of going home, I found refuge at a friend's place. I replayed our confrontation in my mind, over and over. Each repetition made the truth clearer, the puzzle pieces falling into place. Madeline wasn't simply exploring herself through painting. She was rediscovering herself in his bed. Sleep eluded me, and my thoughts were a chaotic jumble. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of her in that robe loomed large, staring at me as if I were the one at fault, the one responsible for the destruction of our life. Now that the truth was out in the open, I was left with one pressing question. What the hell was I going to do about it? I knew I couldn't avoid going home indefinitely. Eventually, I had to confront Madeline and face the reality that we both knew was looming. After what had transpired at Simon's studio, there was no going back to the facade of a happy marriage. But I needed time to cool off, to process the fury and betrayal that simmered within me since I left that place. I wasn't sure how I would respond when I finally walked through that door, but one thing was painfully clear. It was over. When I returned home, the house was shrouded in darkness, except for a solitary lamp casting a dim glow in the living room. Madeline was there, waiting for me, as if she had been all night. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. She gazed at me with wide, anxious eyes, like a child caught red-handed. In that moment, all the love I once held for her seemed to evaporate, leaving only the image of the woman who had shattered our lives. She rose to her feet, wringing her hands in a nervous manner. "James, can we talk?" Her voice was soft, trembling. She looked scared, and for a fleeting moment, I wanted to believe she feared losing me. But deep down, I recognized the truth. She was terrified of being discovered. I didn't respond. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her to deliver whatever feeble excuse she had concocted. She stepped closer, her eyes pleading. "I promise, James, it's not what you think," she began. "I haven't been cheating. Posing for Simon is just part of the process. It's about art, nothing more. He sees me as his muse. It's not about sex. It's about healing. I've been working through a lot, and this is part of that journey." I stared at her, barely managing to suppress the disgust creeping onto my face. Muse? Healing? Was she genuinely attempting to frame this as some noble pursuit? She sounded like she was quoting lines from an art house film, and I decided to play along, watching her squirm and letting her dig deeper into her own web of deceit. "Simon told me everything," I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. "He spilled everything while you were in the other room. He told me about the affair." I watched her expression crumble, just as I had anticipated. All her fabricated confidence and rehearsed justifications vanished in an instant. She stood there, blinking at me like a deer caught in the headlights. "James, her voice faltered. And then, like a dam breaking, the flood of her emotions spilled forth. She crumpled, sobbing into her hands. "I didn't mean for this to happen. It wasn't supposed to turn out like this." I felt nothing as I watched her break down. No pity, no sympathy, just a cold, hollow emptiness. I had already been shattered. Her tears had lost their meaning. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded, my tone sharp enough to cut through her sobs. She wiped her face, struggling to regain her composure. "A few months," she whispered, barely meeting my gaze. "It wasn't just about the painting. It was more than that." I nodded, already bracing myself for what I knew was coming next. "Why?" I asked, striving to keep my voice steady. "Why didn't you tell me?" She sank into the couch, her legs seemingly giving way beneath her. Her body shook with sobs, and for a fleeting moment, I thought she might remain silent. But then she looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, and finally confessed. "I've been unhappy for a long time, James. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you. But things between us haven't been right for ages." A laugh bubbled up inside me. She didn't want to hurt me? She had been sleeping with another man behind my back for months, and now she wanted to portray herself as the martyr. I clenched my fists, trying to suppress the anger that threatened to erupt. "So you chose to sleep with the first guy who made you feel better?" I snapped, my voice harsher than intended, but I didn't care anymore. I was done pretending to be calm. It wasn't like that, she protested, shaking her head. Simon made me feel alive again. He made me feel seen, like I mattered. Those words struck me harder than any physical blow. She had been alive with him. What had I been doing all this time? Had I merely been a placeholder while she waited for something better? I stood there, absorbing her words, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on my chest. There was no coming back from this. The life we had built together, the love we once shared, it was dead. She had killed it, and there was no repairing the damage. You could have told me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You could have been honest. We could have tried to fix this.